Good evening, everybody. There are still a few seats in the middle if people either want to move in or some of you on the side want to try to move in front of a few in the center there. It's a tradition of CCA architecture that each semester we have one of our own faculty participate in our lecture series. And it's with great pleasure that I'm able to introduce Lisa Iwamoto and Craig Scott of Iwamoto Scott Architecture as our lecturers this evening. Craig is an associate professor of architecture at CCA, and Lisa Iwamoto is an associate professor of architecture at Berkeley, a partnership like a number of others related to these two institutions that have enabled a continual academic dialogue across the Bay. Iwamoto Scott is a highly innovative and award-winning architectural firm located in San Francisco that defines its practice as a form of applied design research. Engage in projects that span the spectrum from urban-scaled architectures, such as the visionary 80-story Edgar Street Tower project in Lower Manhattan, to fabricated museum installations, such as Oblique Space, an invited installation for the 2009 Seoul Design Olympiad, and Light Cone, an installation proposal for the Guggenheim Museum's 50th anniversary exhibition. Other critical projects have included Villa 43, one of 100 villas by 100 architects selected by Herzog and Demeron from around the globe for the Ordas 100 residential development in Inner Mongolia. Last semester when Peter Lewis of Tsunomaki Lewis came, I think he showed images of 100 lost architects dressed in black traversing this barren landscape, and I realized probably in those images were Craig and Lisa as well. Voussoir Cloud, another project, an invited installation at the Sci-Art Gallery in Los Angeles. Images of this project we exhibited in our Flux exhibition last spring. And HydroNet, a futuristic macro-scaled biomorphic infrastructural rhizome for which they won the grand prize for San Francisco in the History Channel's City of the Future design competition. Iwamoto Scott's work has also been commissioned by, exhibited in, and or part of the permanent collections of many important cultural institutions, such as their Jellyfish House commissioned by the Vitra Design Museum, and M Ocean, an installation at the SF MoMA. In 2007, they were also finalists in the MoMA PS1 Young Architects Program design competition for their project Reef. The firm has received many significant awards and honors, among them inclusion in the 2010 Cooper Hewitt Design Triennale and the Architectural League of New York's 2007 Emerging Voices Series. They've also received 4 San Francisco AIA Design Awards, 3 ID Awards, R&D Award from Architect Magazine, and an AIA California Council Emerging Talent Award. Their work has been widely published in many books and journals, in Building Blog book, Transmaterial 1 and 2, Next Generation, Folds, Blobs, and Boxes, and they've also been published in many magazines from Architectural Record and Architect Magazine to Metropolis and Dwell, and also I could say the San Francisco Chronicle. John King is sitting in front of us here, or at least in front of me. Maybe he's not in front of you. Lisa is also the author of the book Digital Fabrications, a recent publication by Princeton Architectural Press that came out in 2009. Both Lisa and Craig received their Master of Architecture degrees with distinction from Harvard University's Graduate School of Design, and in addition to their current faculty positions at CCA in Berkeley, they have also taught at the University of Michigan, Sci-Arc, Harvard, Sydney University, and Yale. I am very proud of the accomplishments of our faculty, and I'd like you to please join me in welcoming Lisa Iwamoto and Craig Scott this evening. Okay.
All right. These lights don't go down at all, do they? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Isla, for that generous introduction. And it so happens that the first time we lectured in public on our work was here in this room back in 2002 when we moved back out to the Bay Area after teaching in Michigan. And the work is represented, some of it by this slide, and what we're going to focus on tonight is more of the work done since that time, and in specific, a series of projects that were, for the purpose of this talk, going to roughly have organized in terms of scale. And what unites this work, and the scale also being split into two kinds of work in general, one being material and fabrication research projects, and the other building to urban scale. So it moves from the scale of a prototypical furniture piece to the speculative proposition for a whole metro region at the other end of the spectrum. What unites the work is this interest in heightening the performative aspect of architecture in terms of space, form, material, and fabrication technique, particularly in relation to site and experiential context. We also try to work with an idea of adaptation in terms of having the familiar be adapted to particulars of environment, and so that it can produce a transformative or synthetic result in the end. Though the both of us pretty much collaborate on all this work together, we've split the talk so that Lisa will be speaking about this first category of work, and I'll be talking about the second group, and then at the end we're reserving some time to show 4 projects nearing completion as built works at the end. With that, I'll switch over to Lisa.
Hi, thanks very much. So this first project was an installation for an exhibit in Chicago called Ornament in 2005. And I had been teaching a number of digital fabrication courses at Berkeley around this time, and one of the things we wanted to consider was the non-fixity of form. So while the CAD/CAM process generated many supple, beautiful, intricate, complex shapes and forms, ultimately they were fixed objects in the end. And we wanted to think about a hybrid curtain, kind of Venetian blind, that would be operable by the human hand upon completion. And so a lot of our work actually follows a kind of dialectic process in a way, I suppose, where we're looking at 2 sides of one problem. So the Venetian blind being one kind of window covering, the curtain being another kind of window covering, one working in section, the other working in plan. And if we could design a curtain that could combine those 2 effects. What we developed after looking at a kind of modular origami system was, in fact, what we discovered is by using small rubber bands in each of these modules that they could hold 2 discrete shapes, out or open and in or closed, and hence the name in-out curtain. And so our early prototype looked at these as individual modules kind of strung together with construction zip ties to see how each module could transform its deformity as one area was pushed onto its adjacent neighbor. So early studies looked at simple cardstock models, which later developed into, this is kind of one shape variation, which later developed into an intertwining system of construction so that the deformity would be able to be translated easier from one module to the next. And so those are strung simply around kind of mylar strands that hang between them. The curtain as a whole, what we discovered is that the more horizontal the modules are, the greater the shape variation, the greater the deformity of the whole. So we could define each curtain, and our idea would be that this would be a prototype, and that each curtain could in fact have a different pattern, and that we would be able to predict to some degree the kind of deformation that the curtain would take based on the kinds of modules in which it was arrayed from. This is what was ultimately put in the exhibit in Chicago, made out of a laminate wood product that we've used since on a number of different projects. One of those projects is a recent installation, small scale in this case, for the Gwangju Design Biennale in South Korea. They asked about 40 architects from around the world to develop what they called a rest box. And there was a strict stipulation in the requirements. The box had to be able to be built at 2 meters by 2 meters by 2 meters. It needed to have at least 3, if not more, corners articulated so that everyone understood it was a box. But that the bulk of the pieces would be shown at smaller scale, quarter scale, so half a meter by half a meter by half a meter, which ours ultimately was. And then they gave a poem to the entrance, which had to do with a Korean garden. And that garden had a number of different kind of landscape systems, from craggy rocks to trees, and then this poem talked about the transformation from one kind of environment to another, and that the whole would be synthesized and brought together by the inhabitation of a person. So basically what we did is we developed what we thought of as a kind of rock-like or solid whole, out of which a form could be extracted that would house the body in a variety of ways. Our initial strategy was similar to in-out curtain, kind of went through a transformation. The initial idea was that this thing could be made up of a series of boxes, essentially, so that it would be like the rocks, but made into a porous enclosure. Ultimately, what it evolved into was a diagonal or kind of dia waffle grid, pleated as well, where each piece was developed to be able to travel through the volume in a radial pattern, and also have tabs and so forth to be able to form solid faces for structure, as well as to be able to interlock with the next. This shows some of the construction in our office. The final cube that was shipped, some of the interior landscape, and so the structure is really these diagonal pieces, the blocks essentially resting on each other. The two seating positions, the two extremes of the seating positions at the ends, and then what that landscape looks like on the interior, and then the box in the actual exhibit. And there was a whole range, naturally, from the very simple. Ours kind of fell somewhere, probably on the more complex side, which is one reason maybe it wasn't built at full scale. Our interest in folding in pleats as a structural device and also as a spatial and perceptual device we brought here also to our project at UVA. So this was an exhibition we had in the gallery in the architecture school there. And typically, I believe what they suggested we could do was a very limited budget, and they suggested we could use that budget to bring models or to plot out drawings or have them framed. And what we chose to do instead was to make a continuous mural, essentially, a three-dimensional mural, which would show just two of our more recent projects at this time, PS1 and the Jellyfish House, and that it would be constructed out of a series, just plotter paper, pleated into place. So this looks like a slightly cacophonous collection of images, but what we chose to do is project one project on one side of the pleat, and then the other project on the other side of the pleat. So as one moved around the gallery, the different projects would be revealed. This also begins to tap into some of our interests, as Craig was mentioning, the perceptual performance of architecture, where the viewer is considered a part of the piece, so that it is through their movement that the whole of the exhibit is revealed. And then the image flips around the corner to be able to form a kind of holistic whole there. Those are a series of very quick installations. This one took a little bit longer. But this is our project for the Sci Art Gallery in Los Angeles in 2008. We knew which material we wanted to work with. We had worked with this before, both for in-out curtain and then later for the Gwangju rest box. But we were fascinated by the idea of a highly lightweight, translucent, and yet structural material. What we wanted to investigate in particular here was the notion of folding along a curved seam, so that the curve instigates a dish in each independent module, so that there's a sectional implication to the cut-in plan. We did a variety of studies, small handmade models. Unlike some of our other projects which began digitally, this one began by hand, really as a material exploration. And the one that we ultimately decided upon was, if I can get my mouse, or if there's a laser pointer. Okay, well, the one we ultimately decided on is on your lower right-hand corner, which is a kind of Delani triangulation, or a more informal set of triangulations and tessellations. What the module produces, as you can tell from the small handmade model, is a natural vaulted form. So the material study itself began to dictate what kind of forms we would be using ultimately for the project. In terms of the modules themselves, we developed 4 types based on adjacency. Essentially, when it was adjacent to another module, it would have a flat edge. When it didn't, it would have a curved edge. This describes the 4 kinds of modules and some of the geometries. So we had an incredible team in our office, many of whom are CCA students here today, and also students from Berkeley. Chris Chalmers developed the script. I think some of you know him, determining some of the mathematics here together with other people in our office. So basically, it's a kind of complex logarithmic function, but in the end, we simplified it as a 1-to-1 proportion. So the amount of curvature and plan equaled the amount of sectional dish of the modules themselves, and that, of course, shrank the modules. So when it got put into the vault as a whole, we knew how it could fit together. That probably for us was the most complicated part, I think, of the project. Not the most tedious necessarily, but probably the most complicated. And then this shows one vault unfolded, and at that point it really became a packing problem. How do you get these modules to work together so they can also become structural? This shows just a quick abbreviated idea of the script. So we developed a tessellation, a porosity pattern. This is highlighting one particular module, which is the flanges of which are developed by the tangencies of the adjacent triangles. And then the script generates the module itself and instantiates in the whole, also unfolds it for laser cutting for final fabrication. So in terms of the overall form, we knew we were going to be working with vaulted elements. Sciarc Gallery is a pretty great space. It's about 25 by 60 feet. And it's also visible from the top. There's a catwalk on the top, and so we didn't want to stick an object in the space. We really wanted it to be quite different from above and from within, where from within you would feel enveloped in the project, and from above it would then feel more like this set of what we ultimately called our voussoir clouds. Structurally, we, similar to in-out curtain, where we were looking at 2 kind of window covering typologies and bringing them together, we're doing something like that here, but with structure. So this diagram on the left from one of the AD monographs describes the 2 very pure structural conditions, pure compression and pure tension. We wanted to think about confusing that diagram, the clarity of that diagram, and thinking about how to bring it together. So could you make a light and porous vault which works in compression but is translucent, is see-through, and is highly lightweight? We looked, historically at people like Frei Otto and Gaudi, and then worked very closely with Bureau Happold, who is a very innovative and fantastic engineering firm in Los Angeles, who developed digital hanging chain models for us. So those could give us very pure geometries to have the least amount of internal tensions in the vaults themselves. And then, as with structure, with gravity, the greater loads move towards the ground and along the seams, and this helped us with our packing. The more loads there were, the more densely and smaller the modules needed to be placed. So the process kind of went like this. We gave them a set of curvatures. It's a little bit difficult to see, but you're seeing a double set of curvatures here. We gave them a set, and they would run it through their hanging chain modeler and come back with the more pure forms for us, giving it the surface, the tessellation densities, again aggregating and more closely spaced towards the bottom and the seams, the porosity diagram, and then running the script. The project as a whole has a slightly telescoping effect. There's a soffit, as you can see, when you enter the gallery from the front. So that's one of the points of support. So it's supported on 3 edges, and then it cascades downward sectionally as you move back in the space. The plan diagram, 14 vaults ultimately with 2,300 modules. And then, of course, we had to figure out how to build it. This was our one and only construction document, which basically talked about an order of construction, meaning the column bases first in the pink, the ribs next, and then filling in the center. Because the thing about the way that we had wanted to fill the gallery so fully is that you can actually access the point, one part of the vault once you were done with it. So we had to really move just from the soffit edge back. So we basically blew these up into small sections and gave them to a number of students that we had working with us at Sciarc, as well as people from our office. So again, the bases and the seams, and then ultimately filling in the edges, and basically moving from left to right. ultimately with a project like this, it was unstable, highly unstable, until pretty much the last module of any given vault was in place. And then we had to lift him out of that very last crease and then reach in from behind. We had some small people too. This was really helpful because they could get in there. And then the view from above on the catwalk, which is accessible at all times, and the view from below. And we were lucky because someone actually canceled, and so our exhibit, it was really stressful at the time, but our exhibit got pushed up about 4 months. But it was good because it was in August, which was the longest time of the year, and there's that nice clerestory in the Sci Art Gallery. So we got the benefit of the light coming through the material. Here you can see the kind of cascading or the ping-ponging back and forth of the different scale vaults as it moves back in the space, really only big enough for a child to move through at the back. And then some shots of the opening before it got too dense. So sometimes our petals, or we call them a lot of things, but we call them voussoir petals, and but basically our blocks made of very lightweight material look like solid elements. And here you're going to see the curvature and the dimpling of the pieces as well. But other times, as the light shines through, they gain that translucency and the luminosity, which we had been seeking originally. The tops of the vaults are where the petals get the largest, with the greatest degree of porosity. And just some of the different lighting conditions there, and the shadows in the space. And very recently, as Isla mentioned, we were invited to put in a submittal for a speculative proposal for how to occupy the void in the Guggenheim Museum as part of the 50th anniversary of Frank Lloyd Wright's design. I think they invited 200 architects, designers, and artists, so it was quite an honor for us to be able to do that. And we have been working, I'm not going to show these projects, I'm not going to show these projects in this lecture, but we, in addition to that one branch of kind of installation scale projects, we have another which is focusing more on fiber optics and ready-made materials. One is the installation that was in San Francisco Museum of Modern Art for a fundraising event, and another is what we call the fiber optic room. But we worked with this set of ideas for the Guggenheim. So our idea was that we could use fiber optics in two ways. We'd also incidentally been working with the gallery in New York about fiber optics not as a capturing light source, but as a projective light source, as if you put a bundle of fiber optics on the end of a LED projector, LCD projector, for example. So the idea here is that fiber optics would be used in two ways. One is a projective medium to project the images from the collection on the gallery walls, and the other as a light capturing medium from the skylight above and the clerestory lighting inside, and that these two combine in the void. Some of the images for the exhibition, the billowing effects of simple catenaries of those fiber optics, moving through the ramp, and then looking into the void. And the last project I'm going to present for this installation scale work is a project we did for PS1 in 2007, which we entitled Reef. And our idea here is that we would take elements of the reef, like the coral, the anemone, the reef rocks, and the seafloor, and architecturalize them into components for seating and shade. So here a reef mound for seating. The seafloor is a simple gravel bed, which kind of unites it formally through the courtyard space, and then our anemone canopy. We wanted to work pretty simply by hanging. We wanted a column-free space so that everyone could see the DJ. The PS1 series is meant for music events that happen throughout the summer that can have as many as 8,000 people at any one time. And so the space gets quite full, and the DJ tends to be, it's not in this image, but at the back of the space where you see that black slot. We worked with what was there for us structurally, trying to tap into the walls where they could offer the most lateral resistance, for the most part, and then use those as a set of lines on which to, cables essentially, which became lenticular trusses on which to hang our modules. And those became projected down onto the ground to modularize the reef mounds. What we chose to do though first is to locate the mounds based on how we imagine the circulation diagram. And then this became a vastly simpler set of lines that would generate the modulation of the canopy and the mounds below. Then again, it's united together. The canopy is above, united together on the floor with the gravel bed on which the reef rocks sit. An image looking at one of the final renderings. The canopy hovers over the existing concrete walls. We wanted to be able to see it from the street so that there would be recognition that the warm-up series was happening. And then here you're beginning to see the modulation of the modules themselves and the reef rocks below. Because we didn't have, because they're hollow, we didn't want them obviously to capture water. Our method for obtaining shade and shadow was simply by elongating them. And so the deeper these modules get, the more shade there is. And so we developed a variety of climactic conditions essentially in the space based on the drooping of this canopy. We use a physical model, a very large-scale physical model, to test its constructability. One of the things about PS1 that I think anyone who's entered it knows is that if you win, which we unfortunately didn't, but if you win, you've kind of got to build it what seems like overnight. You have to have it done in the next couple months. And so we use the model as a way of generating all the files that we would ultimately use, if we were to build it at full scale. A view of the model from below. The reef rocks were made quite simply. Basically a rib system on which were staggered steps. And here we developed a very simple script so we could take any surface and any pattern on the surface. And it was a small script written by another CCA alum, Chad Carpenter, called Flatten All, which he entitled Flatten All. And it would take all the different pieces and flatten them out so they became a series of terraces. And our idea was that these would be lit from below at night. They became kind of stages and platforms for sitting and dancing. Looking at the canopy from below and above, each module hung on a set of spars that holds the trusses apart and together, I suppose. For this part of the project, the canopy was modeled in CATIA, and so this was a way for us to not only have a more seamless transition with the construction process, but also to be able to have some idea of material quantity and cost control. So basically, once the modules were instantiated, this purple surface that you're seeing, as we manipulated it, would continually update all the modules, and it would give us quantity of material. So we would know somewhere that our budget was kind of in the middle of it, hanging really low, and it being more or less shallow. And then the program could also unfold them into our templates. The different pieces for the hanging modules, which we laid out on the 53-inch wide strips of the material that we were using, a lightweight polyester mesh that really holds no water. We had 4 different canopies: the spars, the trusses, and the brackets. And then we also made a third-scale model of a piece of it to kind of test the light and shadow effects, as well as the effects of the wind, to begin to achieve the aquatic nature that we were seeking. I mean, at first we were trying to model it and digitally, and then we finally Craig brought a fan up and just like, why don't we do this? We also developed products for them: reef fans, reef tote bags, reef pops, anemone vases, and T-shirts with packaging. Joseph Becker was instrumental in all of this work, as well as modeling the T-shirt design, which you can see whose pattern is reminiscent of the modulation of the modules above. And then we also presented them in animation so we could get across the idea of the environmental and kind of atmospheric qualities with the soundtrack. We had a couple Berkeley students do this entire animation and also the soundtrack where they combined a couple songs together to make the track for this piece. So this is entering. You enter on the short end of the courtyard. Entry view. Seeing some of the qualities of light and shadow. So this would be the shade mound. These are the sun mounds. Anytime the mounds are flat, there's water introduced. And for safety, we didn't want them to be slippery. The fog or mist area, mist or swim below, and then moving kind of back through the space. Underneath that the largest shade canopy again. Then there's a room which they call the sand pit. Someone brought in sand one year, maybe about 8 years ago now, and it's been there ever since. This is where we had another flattened mound with the rain canopy, which would simply have sprinklers strung along the truss lines. And then moving back out again. And there was one very small room, which is part of the project, and this is the one place where we brought the modules down low enough for people to be able to touch. Again, it was fabric, so quite soft. This is what we call the wind canopy. People would be able to go in and kind of weave their way through. Now, we didn't model, the DJ would be right there up by the two sets of doors, and so that's the view that most people are going to be having. And warm-up goes for the whole day. I think it starts in the morning around 10 or 11 and lasts until till well after midnight. So in the day, it's a place for families and kids, and it's like a beach, an urban beach is what they call it. But at night, it becomes a real dance party with the hordes of people. And this is where we felt like our mounds could be fully activated. So the students set up a green screen by the elevator and told that someone had to dance for 15 seconds to be able to use the elevator. You might not know Worcester Hall, but you need to use the elevator to get it to your studio space. And they filmed them there and then looped them together. And we had a tremendous amount of help on this project, both from students at CCA and at Berkeley. There were 35 people who helped us build the model, as well as generate the animations and the renderings and so on.
All right. So shifting to the building and urban scale, starting with the Jellyfish House project, which was commissioned by the Vitre Design Museum, excuse me, as part of their exhibit, Open House, Architecture and Technology for Intelligent Living. And the premise of the show was looking 15 to 25 years into the future and critiquing the notion of the smart house. They put out an invitation, and selected from 100 initial architects down to a group of 14 or 12, something like 10, 11. They asked each architect to look at their specific locale. They wanted these projects to come from different regions where the participating architects were located. So we had been thinking about this transformation of Treasure Island, which was in the works already for some grad studios we were teaching, and it seemed like an interesting hypothetical site for the project. So this is a mapping of currents coming through the Golden Gate. And one thing about the island is, well, a few things. One is it's artificial. It was formed from bay fill, and so but over the years, with the occupation by the Navy, certain areas of it have become quite toxic in terms of the ground. And so this middle strip is a kind of ideogram of this notion that what if the island could give back clean water to the bay, and in addition to remediating the toxic soil. And we're fascinated by these early images of this island in this kind of half water, half land state, which if you look around the bay, you can find many more formal instances of these kind of amphibious urbanism is what we called it, or and as well as artificial wetlands. So the idea was to basically perforate the island based on these patterns of the currents with new wetlands. This area was a kind of marshy extension off of Yerba Buena Peninsula of sorts, and we thought, what if the wetlands would be reintroduced? And so this is another ideogram of this array of jellyfish houses amidst this collection of wetlands and new canals as well. We thought if you're going to be working the land, you could bring these canals through at the same time. And so at the urban scale, we did just a couple of brief studies and renderings, zooming pretty quickly into the scale of a single house, as that was really the desire of the museum curators, to not spend too much effort on the kind of urban design, but to get at the idea of the smart house. But we thought about different arrays of the houses into kind of different formations, whether they'd be these row house kinds of urban morphology, or a high density horizontal mat, or even a vertical slab, as well as individual houses, and that the jellyfish house could kind of grow together into these different permutations. But the individual house itself was thought of as having a set of permutations based on program, and this was an early animation of the notion of the intertwining of different zones of spaces for living and spaces for working together with the space of the landscape. And well, I should actually just want to point out, it's the second one from the right that we honed in on as the kind of prototypical jellyfish house. So together with this idea of the wetlands, which through the introduction of the different biological life forms connected with wetlands that are known as ways to remediate toxic soil, we also felt that this house being in sync with the wetland environment could as well work as a method of harvesting rainwater. And so on the left is an early diagram where we thought of the water, the way that the house handles water is more as a kind of spine through some of the spaces. But then we studied how the water actually runs across some of these twisting surfaces that were developed. And the development of that surface came about as an investigation of an idea of a structural skin based on this double geometry of a Delaunay and Verneuil, that when it is brought together forms a mesh, and these are the different layers that make up that skin, where it's about the kind of performance at different levels, both for a thermal enclosure and for capturing rainwater, distributing rainwater, as well as filtering gray water. Because we learned in our initial research the use of UV light and titanium dioxide, that's a method of treating gray water that's actually in place already on offshore drilling rigs and among other places. So this is the kind of dimpled skin on the left that would pull the rainwater in. On the right is that coming together with the mesh. And the structure was proposed as a set of hollow tubes, so basically like veins circulating both fresh water and the treatment of water. And then another layer. Again, we were asked to speculate about this idea of smart architecture in the near future, and so we looked at some technologies already on the horizon. This is a phase change material which is able to store and release heat through changing state from liquid to solid, so that there would be this kind of quilted layer to the skin. And then finally, the idea of the jellyfish actually has to do with it being a creature which is relatively simple in terms of not having a central nervous system or a brain or eyes usually even, but a creature that has a very sophisticated way of responding to its environment. And part of that is this kind of blushing or changing of the actual skin pattern and translucency of the jellyfish. So the early, this is the first stage prototype where it was through modeling it that we found a way to distribute the density of the mesh so it could perform structurally from that finite element analysis. But we had problems here getting the right flow across the surface and moved to a different basic, the same basic form of these twisting tubes that were intertwining, but a different underlying geometry. And this is about the development of a single triangular module that nests between those, into this lattice and populating that lattice with these different densities according to where the loads would be. And the module itself also changed depending if it was more horizontal, it would be more porous or more open to pull in the rainwater. If it's more vertical, there's, it has less of a chance to do that. So that's what that series at the bottom is about. And rendering of those systems coming together, and you see kind of through the multiple layers of that skin. This is minus most of the layers except for the skeletal one in a rendering, and then we use that as the basis of a 3D print for the show. And then we realized with this idea, this presents, this single house kind of out on its own. So that's not so accurate, but it was just to present it in this wetland environment. But ultimately, that the best way to show the building and its changing state was through 4 dimensions. So we made this video for the show. And some other concepts that were behind the work were ideas about ubiquitous computing and ambient technology. The idea that, already there are these smart houses in the works in different places, MIT, and they've been looking into this for a while, where, the refrigerator kind of tells you what you should eat, or there's a lot of button pushing involved. And we thought that couldn't all that technology kind of recede into the architecture and have more of this ambient sense? And at times, if the user desired to have his or her walls more neutral, it could be in that state when you see it in the white, simple surface quality. Or at other times, you could expose this performance of the envelope, its filtration of water, its harvesting of water, and so on. So it could shift into this translucent state where you're able to experience that. And ultimately, we didn't think, a lot about furniture and that, but that in going towards a neutral state, that it would at least, lean towards people who don't want their walls kind of looking like a movie. That actually was another thought, that if one of the layers, now they already have OLED flexible displays, that one of the layers of this structural skin sandwich could in fact be a surface of display. The next project is the Ordos Villa 043, which is the number of the lot out of the Ordos 100 villas that we drew out of a hat, basically, when we went to Inner Mongolia on our first trip. This is some images, not from the site, but in that part of China on the right, where you really get this amazing, blurring of the distinction between building and landscape. This image on the left was out of the plane window right before we landed. But I want to show this because I know with the lecture last semester, Sir Maki Lewis, it was funny to see all these architects walking around the sand dunes, dressed in black, many of them. But what was also kind of surreal was this whole procedure that we went through, which was to bring our designs into this huge conference room in a Holiday Inn in the middle of nowhere and plop them into this giant site model, and with boards printed around the wall. So this went on for a few days, this kind of conference, with the centerpiece being this model of 100 villas. And so your work is, I mean, it was exciting to see some friends and colleagues and meet other people for the first time, but to then have this randomness of how your villa would end up next to another one, and how none of, so many of them seem to not relate to each other at all, although some did. And I think this, because we went 2 times, and we did take this opportunity to kind of rethink our villa when we came back for the second round of work on it. And that's it. This isn't working with the mouse, but this was the site we drew out of the hat from the site plan. And one thing was there was well, I'll come back to that because I just want to go through some of this and the initial concept. But this is also what we brought a big scale model, and this was almost even more surreal because out in the lobby of the Holiday Inn were these models constantly jostling around, so they weren't fixed in the site model but being brought in to present and moved and being put next to other ones. So there's this menagerie of projects. We were told that you should really not go crazy. There were limited budgets to these things, even though they were 10,000 square feet, that there are certain ways of building there, and steel is typically not one of them. It's concrete frame, and brick is the typical skin material. So we looked around and thought, this was an image on the site of just a pile of bricks. That's some of the work of Ai Weiwei in the middle, the artist and / designer who's done some architecture, and that's his compound in Beijing where he works, and then the work of Andre Bloch on the far right. But wondering, if we accept brick as the given, what could we do with brick that interests us, and that isn't, and knowing also that labor is one of the things that isn't as expensive, unlike building here. It's that there are just limited materials and techniques. So this was looking at the possibility of, bricks don't have to all stack up on top of each other. They can start to shift over with this age-old technique of corbelling, or producing even surfaces that are more plastic or kind of supple than you would expect coming from bricks. So back to the site. Our site was adjacent to these giant scale, this kind of scale shift. Right across the road was the new Opera House by Canon Design, a new clubhouse, a new museum. Not so new. That's one of the first buildings built. The museum is done. This artist housing, and then this way are all the plots, which were all pretty irregular, but about this. There were 2 different size plots, and you either had a smaller footprint and a 3-story allowance, or a bigger footprint and a 2-story. And they basically laid out square footprints for all the villas, which were recommended areas to build. And more than half the architects ignored those squares, is what we found in our first visit. But we decided there was some thinking put into this plan, which was carried out partially by Ai Weiwei and his office Fake Design. So it became clear that those square footprints were shifted back and forth for a reason, which was to allow a maximum amount of southern exposure and to not just have these buildings all lined up on the street and to allow diagonal view corridors between them. And it so happened our site that we ended up with was one of the most prominent ones in terms of the main entry road was basically on axis looking at it, and you're next to all these public buildings, so it simultaneously felt like it wanted to turn inward for privacy, but it happened to be on a bluff as well and was one of the few sites in the whole development that had views out to the distant horizon. So that was our conundrum in a sense, was and it's what generated this ideogram of kind of the turning inward of that you see in many cultures, but in China as well, the courtyard house typology versus the Western villa represented there in its ideal form of Palladio's Villa Rotunda, of this kind of outward expression towards the surrounding landscape. And so it was about conflating these two. Also on our trip to the Forbidden City, we were interested in discovering, even though that part of the city is so formal and axial and all these cross axes, that there are these interesting oblique kinds of spatial conditions that you find that are much less formal. So this kind of shifted parallelogram-like space. So this is a diagram of our basically taking the block of the square given footprint, extruding it up, shifting it according to views and the prevailing winds, and carving it out and pinching those void spaces to close down towards the prevailing winds and open up towards the southern exposure, which is a major important aspect in a lot of architecture in China and anywhere for that matter. But then taking the site and using it as a kind of sloped trimming plane that cut the top of the villa off so that it kind of mirrored the landscape. And I just have some of these earlier projects because the thing that this project has in common with some of those of Fog House from about 10 years ago now, the 2-to-1 house project, and even that jellyfish house I just showed, is this idea of a negative space concept kind of driving the project, but in particular the void or negative space being allied with a mode of vertical movement or circulation. And so this is a diagram zooming in showing that void space, showing the main circulation of the house, which is basically a double helix wrapping around this centralized courtyard, and how that, which is both in, the green is an interior stair, and let me just back up, and the pink is an exterior stair. So the green spiral feeds all the program of the house and links it together, and the pink joins together these three different outdoor spaces that are lodged in or resting on top on the roof of the house. And that's a kind of not so clean photo montage of the newer form, which was in response to visiting the site, seeing some of the surrounding villas. And although our massing didn't really change, it was more the nature of the negative space and so on. That's a site plan with 3 of the neighboring villas. A view from above and into the courtyard from another corner. We decided to make the entry an auto court for guests. There's a garage for residents off to the side. But here you can see some of the corbelling surface. And basically the geometry is such that the front facade, the east, and the other side facing out to the view, the west, are flat faces, and it's the south and north sides that twist and have this corbelled texture. This is a long section through the center. Part of the program was an indoor pool, an indoor theater, many bedrooms, a Western kitchen and Chinese kitchen, a large living room, a small living room, a large dining room, a small dining room. Kind of over the top program. I mean, and some of, us questioned why it had to be that big, and it was just thought of as a marketing thing, that's what these things needed to be. And recently, there was a show of 10 or so of some of the projects from U.S. firms that we were asked to be part of in Shanghai, and it was nice to see, because our large-scale model was from the first stage, and we never had time, or by that point, money really, to build another big-scale model. But for that show, they built these really nice, white, very well-built models. Doesn't have the corbelled texture, but nevertheless, we were really happy to see that. And we used the digital modeling process to really study how these courses of bricks come together and where that happens. And one of the details turned out to be where the brick, the building face tilted 5 degrees this way on the east and 5 degrees that way on the west. So that's what generated the twisted south and north sides. But the stacked bricks basically were just offset at that tangent 5-degree angle, and that was one of our window jam details of how to negotiate between these bricks, which are staggered, and the rectangular openings. These are some more close-in renderings of, that's the courtyard and this double helix stair. Actually, these renderings were done by a CCA person, not yet grad, soon to be, Sean Canty, who's working in our office on this. You could see the exterior stair kind of nesting into the interior stair around that central court. And then when you come in at this mid-level, you're seeing through that space out to the landscape. The living room up at the top looking south and east, or south and west. Actually, east, west, and south, the living room looks. The entry where, again, you can see the effect of that corbelled surface. And moving up in scale and more recently in time as well is this tower, which is part of a bigger project for the tip of Manhattan that we are invited to be part of. Architecture Research Office in Manhattan was asked to oversee this strategic framework plan for the area between the Ground Zero World Trade Center and Battery Park, and the idea being that that area is a bit run down and left over from the development all around it, and it doesn't have enough connectivity or enough to offer both residents and tourists who are down there. And there's a ton of tourists who move between the World Trade Center site and taking ferries from Battery Park and so on and to the Statue of Liberty. So there's a natural kind of corridor of movement, but there's not a lot there at the moment, is how the client saw it, which is the Alliance for Downtown New York, or the Downtown Alliance. So Architecture Research Office brought in a team of different architects, including us, Lewis or Maki Lewis, Work AC, Morphosis, and the ARO also did a piece themselves. And actually that image on the right is some of the pieces, the ARO element over the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, and our tower is included in that. But this diagram shows the idea of strengthening Greenwich Street, opening it up back to two-way traffic because it's only one-way now, and then reinforcing this cross east to west set of connections for pedestrians. But the sites were quite different as they were divvied up, and ours happened to be very kind of prominent, again, the luck of the draw, or however that worked. But it was, the brief on our site said that it in fact did call for something like an iconic building, given how visible it is from the New York Harbor, So we realized when we started zooming out this interesting relationship. The Brooklyn Battery Tunnel surface is right there, but you happen to be also exactly on axis with Fifth Avenue. And so that just had us thinking about this interesting potential relationship. I mean, Fifth Avenue is such a major street in New York. It's a spine, in a sense, of all of these incredible institutions and shopping, residential, the edge of Central Park, the division between the east and west addresses. But our site was oriented, like a lot of Lower Manhattan, on a different geometry than the famous gridiron plan of the body of Manhattan. But yet, so we realized the tower is going to be tall enough that you could actually perceive that relationship. And that diagram on the right is about that kind of twist, the idea that it could be a perceivable relationship. And so at this point we were using Grasshopper to script a series of twisted forms to look at to kind of exhaust the possibilities of what this twist would do if you move it up or down the base of the tower. And this is the ultimate form that we right. I should point out on the site, it's occupied by an MTA parking structure now, which bridges over the street, and Edgar Street is now blocked off as a public way. And so we thought that was a very important aspect of this site, was to reopen Edgar Street down at the ground. So this is a set of images from one of the Grasshopper scripted processes of generating this form, which has to do with that twist from the void of making a passage for Edgar Street up to this slot at the top that aligns with Fifth Avenue and that kind of axis to the north. And that the sides are tapering in, accounting for the zoning envelope, which incidentally we argued there was a set of air rights increases in volume and height that were available for the surrounding Greenwich South development, that if we applied them all to our tower, it could go to 1,300 feet. Because they asked for an iconic tower, and we felt, that's what the site warranted and what we were interested in pursuing. So this shows that in the pink, the void space as it works its way up. Rethinking about this idea we've been fascinated with, the fiber optic room, and whether that could operate at the scale of this whole tower, pulling light from the sky into these what are typically kind of dark spaces in the canyons of these tight streets in Lower Manhattan, but also to light up this atrium space at the heart of the building. And this is a programmatic breakdown and seeing the voids of this double atrium, then the form of the building and in its context, where the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel surfaces. There you can see it relative to the ferry terminal and Brooklyn, or the Battery Park, and in the distance. And so of interest to us also is the nature of the skin, and we ran some studies of in ecotech of heat gain and so on, and developed a skin that could be adapted in different areas off of this, basically a diagrid structural skin. We were proposing an inner structural core and an outer kind of exoskeleton with no columns in between. These being on the east side, the south side, the north side where it has the least depth, and facing the void in the area of the residential program where you would want some glimpse kind of obliquely out of that flat, but not so much direct view across at your neighbors, and how that skin plays out around the form of the tower, which had this element to it, trying to really adapt it to the dynamic of the curvature of this flow of movement out of the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. This is basically your first experience coming through that tunnel of Manhattan, this threshold moment. So we thought a lot about how this tower would appear when you emerge from underground. Seeing the skin from different vantage points and how it's modulated. And the plans, we took this part pretty seriously, working out the cores and the program. And so this is the ground plan where Edgar Street cuts through. You basically have 2 cores and 2 lobbies. There was additional program between that and the office program in the middle of the tower, which is that pink layout. And in between was this big atrium, some arts-related and civic program like a branch library. And then the blue on the right there is the residential condos. And you can see the cores actually, surprisingly, after a lot of finagling, could work with this form of the building in this orientation at the base and this other orientation at the top, where we had different sets of elevators that started and stopped to feed the different programmatic zones. And then the one thing that really had to negotiate the twist, which we felt was the most malleable, are these egress stair cores, which could be angled and so on. And it's actually the atrium, which is this double volume that crosses over Edgar Street, that we felt could feed into those cores in a more environmentally driven way. And so we thought of the atrium as kind of like lungs for the building, where the floors would contain these terrarium pockets that would filter the air in the building, and that set of egress stairs could become the supply and return ducts as well to that system. So these are some of the final renderings from looking west towards the Hudson River through the base. And so the atrium would be kind of glowing too during the day with fiber optic light being pulled from the top. And that's how, you see those kind of white lines pulling through. And then some views into this terrarium-filled atrium floors and across that space, and then looking down to where you'd have this glass floor to see the movement of cars and people on Edgar Street. So the last of these projects, I'm going to move pretty quickly through because we've presented this before here when we won the competition, and it was on exhibit here. So City of the Future, the History Channel sponsored this and invited us to be part of it. There are 8 architects involved. It was a really exciting competition. We had a great team again of both employees and volunteers. And so the premise in this case was looking 100 years in the future and thinking about remaking the metro region. They've gone around to different cities, New York and LA in the first round, and San Francisco and DC and Chicago in the first round. The second time they held this one, we were involved, San Francisco, DC, and Atlanta. So we zoomed out and in this case thought that the logic or pattern of this could become in a more bottom-up manner from existing transportation nodes and population density nodes. And it really ends up operating like a kind of network, a distributed network diagram, which is on the right there. Another thought was by then, with all the speculation about rising waters, that this much of the edge of the bay would be inundated. And so rather than trying to stop the flooding, we figured that land would have to transform and adapt. And so we proposed that it could be producing algae as an aquaculture zone around the whole bay. And that little diagram has to do with this idea of an east-west exchange of new resources drawn from the environment. But the fog coming in off the ocean could be harvested for fresh water. There happens to be a giant aquifer under the city as well, which is that blue figure, and then the aquaculture zone using algae to generate hydrogen fuel. So our model, this competition takes place over 1 week. We had another few days before that to gather our thoughts, but it's a really quick thing, and it's part kind of reality TV, and it's about staging, you know, and putting this piece together in a public space and all that. But so we strategized the model so that it could basically reveal a big part of the concept, which was that off of that pattern that you saw of the larger region, we proposed that when it would come to San Francisco, it's such a dense place that new and so crowded, and so the infrastructure is almost at a limit now, let alone with, you know, several 100,000 more people in 100 years. So we figured you would need underground, either you have airborne or underground traffic or a system of infrastructure to funnel higher speed traffic to get around the city. And so the idea was that the network that feeds the city with the flows of traffic and could also distribute the hydrogen fuel produced from the algae aquaculture zone, and in the end offer this new kind of way of experiencing the city. This is zooming into that algae aquaculture zone along the bay side of San Francisco with these so-called algae towers, and it connecting into this set of nodes of the network, a piece that Charles Lee spent a good deal of time figuring out, and as well as Ryan in our office with the towers. And the idea being that those were part of this much bigger system. This is a section cutting across from the ocean to the bay, and the various pieces of or components of our proposal were revealed through this cut. This ocean fringe densifying the population along the ocean, aquifer hub, which had to do with tapping into that underground aquifer, what we called fog flowers for harvesting fresh water, geothermal mushroom tapping into geothermal energy, the portals which connect the underground and the above ground, this aqua network, which is basically the tower zone, and then out at the edge, the sky portal where you would enter the network. So that's the ocean beach view with one of these giant fog flowers, and this is a rendering showing the underground relative to the above ground, so you're seeing through some of those fog collectors up near Twin Peaks, this geothermal mushrooms hovering over Twin Peaks with the algae towers densifying the downtown. And then we assumed, I mean, with the pace of technology, cars are likely to not be earthbound by then. They're already practically flying now. But then again, San Franciscans would never want their air filled with cars, and that you would basically have to dive underground into these portals to access the network. And then underground would be the flow of this clean burning hydrogen fueled traffic that we saw as an interesting possibility of offering these new versions of former social spaces like the baths, public baths and things like that, coexisting with this flow of clean burning traffic. And that's the final image in the fog. And so we're going to go really quickly through just 4 projects. This year happens to mark our first 4 built things bigger than installations, like buildings and interiors. 3 of them in San Francisco, which will be, one's pretty much complete, the other 2 will be complete next month, and one in Hawaii, which is almost complete.
So the first of these, and I will try to go quickly, is in a really beautiful new building by Charles Blosies. The property itself is called 1 Kearny, and it encompasses all these three. And the branding of the project is actually quite accurate, which is it's 3 different eras of building coming together. Charles Moore Edition, which is on the corner of Geary and Kearny, the original 1 Kearny building, and then Charles Blosies, which is still just wrapping up construction right now. And our task was to design the interior of the lobby on the Geary Street side, so on the opposite side of what you're seeing there. And it's a bent space with elevators in the back. So really the challenge is to draw people from the front street edge through the lobby to the back of the space. There's also a historic display element, which is mandatory in the city of San Francisco, which we're placing against one edge. This is a slightly older version. And our original concept for this was a series of lighted coffers that would draw upon coffered ceilings of buildings of the previous era, such as those in the historic display, and that they would be light generating. So pulling one and using the same kind of material that we had used for voussoir cloud. Deeper at the front and then more shallow as one moved towards the back, kind of wrapping around the space. The scope of the project changed a little bit, not really the scope, but the actual dimensions of the project changed a little bit, where the ceiling wanted to be lowered in the back, and also for various, kind of budgetary reasons, the project became much more simplified. The lower one is the original idea, and the upper one is what is getting built, which is a much more simplified and localized area of coffers, which still acts as a kind of this luminous chandelier upon entry in the highest area of the space. But then breaking out the geometries of those into facets that line the walls and having the light emerge from the edges of those facets against the adjacent lobby, now existing lobby spaces. This is a rendering of the project getting built, and we did receive a 1% for art status for this project through the San Francisco Planning Commission. The historic display now being a much more refined, and Charles Blosies is the architect of record for our lobby project as well. So we worked to kind of through design development and the fabrication of some of the pieces, including the coffers, but things like the historic display, they refined together with us as well. So now it's a very simple glass, kind of singular glass sheet, behind which are LCD panels. And the status of the construction right now. The coffer is built and kind of waiting to be installed, and some of the framing. It's a little bit further along than this, but some of the framing of the facets. And then the other interiors project is for an interactive and immersive media company called Obscura Digital. We had done some collaboration work with them before, but they're moving their offices, which are not just offices, but include shop facilities, prototyping space, and large showroom into this 36,000 square foot building on 3rd Street, or 3rd Ave and 18th. And it's, again, it's kind of like Kearny, and that's not just this building, but it extends to the back. There's a slope to the site, so in fact, there are multiple entries to the building. The lower, off the lower level, is entry from the parking lot, and then the pedestrian level is onto the 2nd floor. So this is basically lower floor, middle floor, and then the upper mezzanine. The lower area is going to be designated for shop, prototyping, and also some of their showroom. The mezzanine level for fire separation reasons, and also because they're actually light averse, because as a digital media company, they work in what is now kind of it's like this room, actually. They painted every surface black, blacked out all their windows. They want it to be dark. So the upper mezzanine becomes a kind of cave, sort of, where the digital production staff sit. And then our attention is really on the 2nd floor, which is includes the client lounge, the offices. It's a primary entry for clients. The budget for this project started at $1.25 a square foot, and it's since been raised to $9, almost $10 a square foot. So it's an incredibly, incredibly limited budget. one of the major things that's happening is cutting a floor, cutting through the floor, which connects the main level to the shop below, but also which allows overlook into the showroom. So our basic intervention is, here you're seeing, this is the pedestrian entrance. We're building a conference room which overlooks the new hole in the floor to be able to overlook the showroom area, a new stair, an informal circulation stair, introducing new offices which have a series of twisted walls on the edges. And this area here is going to be our office, so we're also moving into the space. An initial rendering of the conference room. At one point, I think it was 1986, the building was seismically retrofitted with an incredible amount of horizontal and vertical steel bracing. So what you're seeing here is the edge of the conference room bulging out to absorb one of those horizontal braces, and then the gap which allows passage to the stair to move downstairs. This firm also projects onto non-planar and all kinds of, basically all kinds of surfaces, buildings, and domes. And so they're going to install a dome, which you're seeing in the background there, one of their domes into which they project on, predominantly on the inside, but possibly also on the outside. A view from the conference room from the other end, kind of the large aperture, the large window where clients can look out, again, over there, and the clients can look out over the showroom area. And then also the series of twisted walls which have a set of funnels, entry funnels, which stagger along the wall so that you're not kind of facing a whole bunch of doors. There's a design for a railing which is probably not getting built exactly at this time, but we hope it will be soon in the future, which is a very simple cantilevered, vertically cantilevered folded metal plate as a series of blades along that opening. There's also going to be a series of automated blinds that shut down so that they can darken the entire space from the ground floor up through for the showroom. And so this is, on the lower floor you're seeing the conference room looking out over that open space without the blinds and with. Some early studies, or it's not really going to get built quite like this, but examining the way to make that one surface which accommodates the diagonal brace, and the status of construction right now. Now at the end of this, kind of where that row of windows is facing the east, is going to be our offices. And so one of our ideas was that we wanted to allow for a porous enclosure between us and the rest of the space, because it is a quite wonderful light source on the whole, although there is a series of north windows as well. This is just looking through some of the office walls as they stand now with the metal framing.
Be clad in twin wall polycarbonate.
Yeah. And then for our wall, we're fabricating it ourselves. And again, we want it to be a porous kind of enclosure, beginning with a Penrose pattern, but also developing some efficiencies with the tiling. So 2 basic sizes, 4 varieties each. And then some of the early studies, we're not fully far along with it. We would like to be storage on the back. This is something Ryan Golenberg is working on in our office right now. The different strategies for A, tessellation, but B, also structure, so that it can be self-supporting. And using, again, those 8 or 4 varieties of 2 modules, and kind of where it stands now.
And finally, this one will be quite brief. It's in Kauai and Kalaheo, not so far from the ocean. And it's on a site that has a great, pretty much 180-degree view towards the ocean, but there's a rapidly growing subdivision in these fields, or in the front, which were former agricultural fields. So part of the challenge was kind of bracketing out that foreground view, but also there's quite strong winds from the east, and yet that's the direction that this preferred mountain view is. So, as well as the town of Poipu on the coast. So the site allowed a 60 24-foot building width, and with the setbacks, and the main programs wanted to be on that south edge facing the coast, meaning the master suite, the kitchen, dining, and living, but it also wanted to turn kind of towards that other view and not just orient straight out to the ocean. So that is where the form of this house generated from, as well as the idea of opening up this courtyard void in the center that funnels the prevailing breezes through if you want them, if you open the windows, but basically to get those trade wind breezes through the house. And so those two things, this kind of skewing and sheltering of the sides and orienting out in an oblique way with the void. And this is an image of it. It's the construction materials are pretty much set there by what people build with, and we were using just a cement board lap siding and board and batten. And the interiors are pretty raw still. That's getting filled out soon, but this is a shot from about a month ago or so. And the last project is here in San Francisco, which pretty much is done. There's its first speculative project by a client who bought this property in North Beach on Powell Street, which has an Edwardian building in the front with a commercial storefront down at street level and a 2-bedroom unit above that, and then in the back had this shack, which you'll see a before picture of. And so that was a zero lot line building, which was grandfathered in terms of it not being allowed if you do a new building. But the other thing we were interested in, well, that we had to stay on that footprint, but could we start to allow this very defined courtyard space between our new building and the back of the old building to have some spatial connection to this inner block negative space, which you find in most cities, and here there's a set of courtyards and so on, and so to not just be sealed off from that, but still have your private courtyard that this orients to, as well as this issue of privacy between the back of the front building and the front of the back building. So this is the old back of the front building, and shack that was there that was just, with pigeons living in it, basically. We wanted to preserve these neighboring building walls and not cover them up, this interesting contrast of the brick to the siding. And that building, the footprint was so small that the stair was on the outside. So all that got demoed, except it got demoed to the back of that front building, and the courtyard levels were developed as well as the privacy screens. There's a diagram of the negative space condition, which is basically the courtyard, this extension, this passageway to the sidewalk, which is your entry, and then this other connective balcony space that joins it up to the mid-block garden space. And then the building in that context, and then pulling it apart, seeing this passageway connector, the kind of back of the screen on the back building. The front, or the new building in the back, is on about a 20 by 25 foot footprint. It's a 3-story house that's a little over 1,200 square feet, and it required this 3-story moment frame at least for the design we had, which was to have a very transparent relationship to the courtyard. So these are elevation section, the 3 plans, which show that as it goes up, the plan kind of pushes over to the north to allow this balcony on the south, and hence to open that space up. This is a set of photos from a couple weeks ago. The only indication, actually, which is partly why it passed by the North Beach Neighborhood Association and the Telegraph Hill Dwellers Association, who were notoriously against anything new in their neighborhood, but it's because you can't see it essentially from the street. I think that we were able to get it passed. So that door, which has a temporary door handle, I just found out, it'll be better looking than that one. And then you come into this passageway with this light coming from the edges, and a panel on your right, a space that was only 3 feet as was found, but it got widened to 3.5 feet. And it's lined with the material that you then encounter in the courtyard, which it's actually exterior. Yeah, Lisa was just pointing out. You don't go inside technically till the front door at the end, and that's a view from the kind of upper level of the front building, looking at the main facade of it, where it's living below, opening onto that courtyard, sleeping level, and a loft opening to the south of this balcony. And the main materials are Ipe and the stainless steel frame with the channel glass for privacy and to filter the light. Inside is this kind of high contrast hemlock floor, which is one of the few engineered wood products that works over a radiant heat floor. You're seeing a piece of the Ipe screen on the back of the front building, again, to kind of clean up the back of that and give privacy, and the living on the left and turning around. We didn't do the landscape. We designed the planner and step condition and all that, but that was just put in. Another view, the living space. Moving upstairs, so we're trying to get, use strategies of getting the light as deep into the house, which has these blank walls around the back 2 sides as possible. Actually, that's the sleeping level with the screening the bedrooms of the upper unit in the back. By there, it's all staged now with furniture filling it up. Because it's going on the market actually in a week or 2. That's looking up, but I'm glad I got these shots before it was staged. I realized, even though we didn't even have time to really get a true photographer, but this is that upper level overlooking this space below, and then back into the entry, which brings you back to the street. And with that, we're done. So thank you for your time.
It's a little late, but we'll bring up the lights and open it up for 1 or 2 questions.
Overwhelming. It's late. We went over.
All right, I guess
Thanks for staying.
It's great to see all your work together kind of in one block. And I was just looking at the themes that were sort of running through a lot of the projects. And there's a kind of, inherent tension in all of your projects. Something wanting to become 2, but also remain 1, or being as 2 and maybe, straining to become 1. And so, particularly in your towers and the buildings, and so I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about what that kind of tension represents for you in terms of how your work fits into a broader kind of discourse of building.
Do you want to take that one? No?
Well, I mean, it's something that we don't have big discussions about, but I think it's kind of a shared sensibility of relating to, I think back to, even all the way back to school, and an interest in the difficult whole, or architecture that isn't just giving it all away at the first glance, and having a kind of too clearly understood nature. That there's some kind of unfolding perceptual aspects to it, or even conflation, as like you're putting it. between two things that challenge the viewer's perception or one to think a bit about what you're experiencing. I think whether that's at a small scale or a big scale, it is something we've pursued. And again, we didn't set a big agenda behind it, but I think it's a kind of shared sensibility.
I want to say I love that you asked that question, because I feel like you totally got what, maybe you encapsulated better than even we did in our own introduction in the work that we showed. But I do feel like it's important for us to have that, the negotiation of at least two, but possibly more than one thing, to try to arrive at some synthesis which is sometimes potentially a little bit messy. You know, I think oftentimes the perception is that design is supposed to achieve some kind of optimization, and that is something that we're definitely not interested in. We're much more interested in a synthesis, which is sometimes a messy conflagration of a number of competing concerns. I mean, all good architecture ultimately, I suppose, has to deal with a number of competing concerns that don't necessarily fit nicely together. And how do you just manage those? You know, how do you manage those different conditions together? And in our case, we want to manage them in such a way that the argument of the architecture is still somehow perceptually apparent.
Sounds
super clear. Is that not clear? Thank you.
I have just one last question. And it has to do with the relationship between the smaller scale projects on the one hand and the large scale projects. Because perhaps the degree of investigation might be the same at two different scales, but it produces in the end two very different conditions. And the other is the relationship now between your built work and what becomes more competition work or installation projects, and how they're either influencing each other or divergent as the case may be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there are a number of competitions that we would have went on even longer, so we didn't show those. But that is kind of a middle ground in that we want to do buildings, obviously, and that is a kind of terrain of experimentation and exploration, where coming from the digital fabrication projects and those attitudes and strategies and applying them to building scale, and where we're in the two interiors especially, I think, attempting to pull that through into the built work with the houses, mainly with the budget and scope kinds of issues with these particular houses. There just wasn't, well, one being a distance thing, there wasn't even really a construction administration phase of the Hawaii house, so that I'm surprised, you know, it's turning out as good as it is, even from not being there really during construction. This one we had more a say in that, but not fully even in some of the finishes, because it's a spec project basically. But yeah, we hope to be able to have chances to do buildings with some of the same intensity as those small projects, obviously.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.